page 12, the center of the page. Laws relating to benedictions. As long as you touched onto it, so let everyone take a look at it. So we'll.
On page 12.
Page 12, the first paragraph on top of the page, third line, center of the third line. The singing of a woman is akin to nakedness, as regards the reading of the Shema, etc. However, when a man hears a woman sing and he is unable to stop her, he must not, because of that, refrain from reading the Shema, the Shemona Esrei, or the study of Torah, but he shall concentrate upon the holy subject with which he is occupied and pay no heed to her singing. The basic precept is that Kol Isha, which means the voice of a woman, Erva, is considered as if nakedness. What does that mean? When a person comes into shul, or for that matter, it's not really only when a person comes into shul. The law is basically written in general that when a woman sings, again, the basic foundation is what we said last week, that the laws were written so to try and protect the person to the utmost from ever falling into the hands of temptation or desire where one would do something wrong. Therefore, all the laws were written so, taking the preliminary step of telling you, stay away from situations that will cause problems for you. Therefore, we learn, don't hang out with women, don't talk too much to women, simply because sooner or later, not by all people, by some people, whatever, it can lead to trouble. It has been known to lead to trouble from a small little conversation of hello, how are you? And eventually it brings problems. A woman's voice, or the singing of a woman's voice, in the eyes of our sages, is considered erva, which means, the transliteration means nakedness. It doesn't mean, of course, nakedness, literally nakedness. It just means that to a man, if he finds, or he hears rather, a woman singing beautifully, to him it can start things going in his mind. A beautiful woman singing a beautiful song, it's been known to have its toll upon the male beast. So, therefore, the law was basically written in general. The law was basically written in general that one should not hear another woman singing. Your own wife, you can hear her sing, I suppose. Or you should hear her sing. But as far as a strange woman, one should not hear, because it is in fact distracting. The fact is, and they always hit the nail right on the head, and they don't pull punches, and they very much tell it like it is. And the fact is that if you find yourself, or you allow yourself to fall into a situation where you can be tempted, then it will not turn out well for you. So therefore they try to keep you away from every problem area. Singing, a woman singing, can be a situation that would tempt a man, or certainly distract him, where he would certainly start paying attention and observing, and his mind would wander. Therefore, so this is in general. This is in general. If you're walking around in Kifu and the woman sings, you're not supposed to be listening to it. Let alone if you come into shul where your concentration is really supposed to be with the davening and with the holy things. So certainly the last thing you want to hear is Maria Callas behind you, singing some beautiful piece. That will totally take your mind off it. And how are you going to sit down and daven if you hear someone vocalizing behind you? And it certainly takes your mind off it. So in a shul, it certainly makes sense.
Well, what about when he's singing?
When he's singing on his radio?
During Shabbos.
Singing in shul.
Yeah, singing
Our women, I'll tell you.
Well, because of voices. Rabbi.
You're right, it's the voices.
Yes, there happened to be, there was one elderly gentleman, I heard him say that he heard one of the women singing so beautifully that he stopped praying.
Over here it happened?
I was sure. Yes, a few months ago.
Who was the woman?
So just
Never mind the
I
man.
thought of it.
I'll listen for her next time.
We all know her very well.
Technically, in the shul, it applies to the same rule. But usually in the shul, if the women are singing, so we take it the men are also singing, and hopefully the domineering voice should be the men. Or to ask me a question like that is, if you would hear a loud singing from the women, that is really something magnificent, and we sit back every Shabbos, and to the point where really everyone is really dropping their Siddurim all over the floors and everything, that it's so beautiful, then I can see it being a major distraction. But so far I haven't heard any Siddurim drop. And so women should sing, why not? Women should sing. And I definitely am a strong believer in full woman's participation in everything. In everything. They're as much Jews as the male, and certainly should participate in everything as, whatever applies to them, but 100%. 100%. So they should sing Gesundheit. Within men sing, the women sing. I don't think any shul is in a situation where Orthodox shul that I know where the women are actually on top there, and that's all you hear.
Rabbi, one question. It says that a married woman must have her hair covered at all times. Does that mean before she says a benediction or a bracha, or if she's in the presence of something, I think I just really cover her head. You're sitting here now, I don't have my head covered. How obligatory is it to have the head covered? Under what condition?
We're talking about a married woman, a single woman?
Married woman, you mentioned specifically here, I'm assuming single women don't have that obligation.
See. Night's my night. The law is that a married woman should cover her hair. A married woman should cover her hair. The reason for it being, again, the same reason that applies to the singing and the same reason that applies to everything else. And it's Sar Isha Elva, which means that the hair of a woman, Elva, is, again, I use that word because that is the exact meaning of it. Elva means is nakedness, or is like nakedness, which doesn't mean, of course, that. The reason behind it being that once a woman is married, she should not be attractive to anybody, but you should certainly diminish the chances of you being very attractive to anybody else. By placing the covering upon your head, essentially what you're doing is saying that I am married and that I belong to somebody, And this is without getting into the areas of the head covering for the brachos and so on. This is the general concept of it. By covering the head, that's a way of saying that I am married and that, in fact, I do belong to somebody and to that person and that person only. And no one else has the right to see my hair. Again, the hair was always considered a very attractive part of the woman. A wig is fine as long as your own hair is covered.
She can look much nicer. It shouldn't
Yeah,
be
the
that
fact is-
women purchase to cover her hair rather than the wig.
The fact is, in some instances, that a wig, especially if a woman has curly, kinky hair, and if you put on a wig, it happens to be much more attractive than your own hair. True. True. But nevertheless, the main point being that the woman's own hair should be covered, and as a result of that came into being that people started covering their hair. Now, depending on the group or the sect to where the individual belongs to, some people put on a sheitel or wear a tefillin, and that's it. There are some Hasidic sects where the women completely shave their heads bald practically, and on top of that they first put on a kerchief, and that way they certainly don't have the problem of being attractive to other men. They might have a problem being attractive to their own men, but that's a different story entirely. That's their problem. That's not our problem here tonight. But regardless, that's their following. That's what they have, where they completely cut the hair off. But the basic law is sort of a covering, a showing of belonging that for another man not even to want to look is supposedly it's unattractive. But you're saying the wigs are just as attractive or even more attractive. Fine. But that's the reason behind it. There was a tight security placed around the woman. That is obvious that you see. A very tight security placed around the woman and the man also. All these laws that we read that pertain to the woman is to the man also. Okay, he doesn't have to cover his hair in that sense. He covers his head for another reason. But the fact is that a man also has his guidelines, how he should conduct himself, not to do anything that might develop into something wrong. But all these securities were placed upon both men and women to keep everyone straight. Yeah, supposedly. Hopefully it works. Hopefully it works. Okay, now we start. Any other questions pertaining to this? I just didn't want to get into all this, though you picked onto two interesting points. But most of it is basically for private reading. But these are two good things that you picked onto. The interesting question is, what about on record or on radio? Not. Oh, it was asked. I didn't hear. Are you sure it was asked? Let me find out. If the question is that, assuming you can't hear a woman singing in person, what about on record or on the radio? Is that permissible or not? That's a good question.
Well, I know it depends again to which sect you belong to. Because my uncle, who rest in peace, he belonged to such a holy organization that when the children bought him as television, he was told that they didn't get rid of the television, they would not put him off the deal, that they had to completely remove themselves from all sexual pleasure. And if you didn't, then that was it. So he got rid of the television set. They didn't permit the television in the home or anything that would give them ideas again. All going back then about pulling them away from from the Torah and strictly service to it. And anything that it's almost like the Amish people. who keep themselves very cloistered away from the everyday world and pulls them to be corrupted by it, and to keep them away from all these things and to give them ideas. So I don't know. That was
the main question it boils down to, as far as hearing a woman singing on the radio or on the record, is that if we accept modern technology as the real thing, or in fact, being that it's only a record or a radio, then it is permissible. For instance, one has to hear shofar blowing. Shofar blowing is not really a good example. I was going to say, what if you hear shofar blowing on the radio? Hypothetically speaking, not the fact that it's yondip and it's impossible. Or you hear shofar blowing on the telephone. Because the phone company has a thing, just like dial a joke, you dial for shofar blowing. You dial and you hear shofar blowing. Now again, this is all, obviously at this point, totally hypothetical. Would you consider the shofar blowing that you heard through a mechanism the real shofar blowing? Or, say I'm talking to someone on the phone, and the person makes a bracha on the other end, right? They're drinking a glass of water, and we happen to be talking, makes a bracha, do I answer amen at the other end of the phone? In other words, is this treated as if I'm hearing a bracha, or am I hearing a machine working, and it's not really a bracha? And if that's the case, then the other person at the other end means nothing. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. So what's yours?
So, therefore, if we say that the radio or a record is considered as if the real thing, that I could say get shofar blowing from it, or something real, a bracha, then obviously we would not be able to hear the woman's voice either. But if we're going to say that it's in fact the real thing, then it's not permissible. I can only give you the popular opinion, and many people who, according to the popular opinion, they say the radio or record is fine. However, as the person that you mentioned, who wouldn't have the TV set in the house, obviously if you're going to carry the law out to the extreme, perhaps you wouldn't even go ahead and do this either, even listen to it if it was on the radio or so on. But I can only quote what I see and what I know, and I've yet to find someone practical. I have seen it, but different types of people who are going to turn the radio down when a commercial comes on and she's advertising, whatever, and she starts singing. I bet to see someone turn the radio down.
I remember the same uncle who turned down the television set, and when he turned it, they used to have, when the children used to go, we used to have records where they have Chazanic Lila, all kinds of songs.
Right.
And my cousins, they used to gather, and they used to listen to it, and they could sing it, and they sang it with them.
Women singing on the records?
No, the men.
Label of Waldman.
They're all gone now, but they used to sing, and it was such a fun evening to sit there on a Saturday night after Shabbos was over. They'd gather around and had those old-fashioned controllers with up the top, and they'd all sit, and all my cousins, they could sing it word for word. They could sing right along with them, and it was not considered taboo to have those records.
There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Just the record, but with the television, you have nudity on it, you have all kinds of things, and they supposed to bring it in.
I can certainly understand that. And if anything, not to get off at that totally, because I want to go on. If anything, if you recall, about 5 or 6 months ago, there was a trial of a youngster. It gained prominence, national prominence, over the fact they say he committed a murder, I think it was, and his lawyers right. His lawyer's defense was, which I think they threw out of court eventually, but I think his lawyer's defense was that he was influenced by some violent show on TV, and that made him go out. So if what you're saying is what you see on TV, you're going to go out and later do, then certainly it's a bad influence. And certainly nowadays, where it's all garbage anyway. Except for the Hebrew hour at 9:15 on Channel 4. That's a little bit. Okay, page 12. Now we get into the laws relating to benedictions, the laws relating to the various brachos and so on. Before uttering any benediction, we must make sure which one it is, so that when we mention God's name, which is the most important part of the benediction, we shall know what we are thanking Him for. It is forbidden to do anything else while reciting a benediction, and it must not be uttered hurriedly, but attention must be paid to the meaning of the words. And this is what the book of Pious, Sefer HaChasidim, says. When we wash our hands or utter a benediction over fruit, or over a precept, benedictions which everybody knows, we must direct our attention to praise the name of our Creator, who was wondrously kind to us in giving us the fruit or the bread of which we partake, and in commanding us to perform this precept. We must not do it automatically, out of sheer habit, spouting words thoughtlessly. On account of this, the anger of God was kindled, and He sent us word by Isaiah, His prophet, saying, For as much as this people draw near, with their mouths and their lips do honor me, and their fear of me is but the acquired precept of men. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to Isaiah, Look at the deeds of my children, and see that they do it only outwardly, and hold on to it just as a man clings to the practices of his forefathers. They enter my house and pray to me the fixed prayers, in accordance with the customs of their fathers, but not with their whole hearts. They wash their hands and utter the benediction for the occasion. They cut off a piece of bread and utter the benediction hamotzi. They drink and pronounce benediction habitually, but at the time they do not intend to praise me by it. Therefore His wrath was kindled, and He swore by His great name to destroy the wisdom of their wise men, who know Him and praise Him because of established customs, but not wholeheartedly, as it is written thereafter, Therefore, behold, I will do yet farther, so that the wisdom of their wise men shall be lost. Therefore have the sages warned us concerning this matter, saying, Do things for the sake of their Maker. A man should accustom himself to say the benedictions aloud, because an audible voice is conducive to concentration of mind. In this little paragraph here, they said a mouthful. They said everything that we stand for, everything that we believe in. He said it all. He really said it all. And what he's basically saying is the fact that it's painful sometimes to talk about it, because we're not talking about the people who are not observing, say, who are not washing their hands, who are not going to the synagogues and praying. Those people, of course, the Rabbi Shalom, or God, definitely cries for. We're talking now about the people who supposedly are observant, those who do go to the shuls, those who do wash before they eat, those who do bench after they eat, those who supposedly would fall into the category of observant Jews. And what he's saying now is that even these people are not doing it right. The ones that don't do anything, there's nothing to talk about. They're not doing anything, period. But the ones that do it, it's all a matter of habit, where you wake up in the morning and you jump at the shul and you knock it out in 25, 30 minutes, and then you go about your day, and it's all a matter And of course, the promises of destruction were promised, and unfortunately, have come to pass as well. Yeah.
I'm thinking, in line with what you're saying, but with a little broader interpretation, I'm thinking all those practitioners, those very supposedly pious people, who cross every T and dot every I, they do everything exactly so, but they're truly not good people, or they're not religious people, or they do things which belie all this practicing. And I'm thinking of people, for instance, like we have like the Bergmans or other people who disgrace us by doing dishonest or things, or even people who are supposed to be very, very orthodox, and then they go ahead, they don't give charity, or they don't have the spirit of the religion. They do all the top surface things, but truly in the heart, they don't extend themselves as a human being to do the right thing. And I think that this is the thing, as you said, it says a mouthful, that I could really understand, because I suppose in every family we have people like that who tell you, you're not doing this, you should do that, and then when it comes to being charitable to orphans or something, they have very hard hearts and they turn aside and they're not charitable. When they could do something really good for an unfortunate person, they don't. This is what bothers me very much.
You will also notice, though, that God does not play favoritism at all. That it's not as if he's saying, well, my real fans, those who supposedly observe and come to shul, who are basically my real followers, that everything that they do is justified and they're 100% right just because they happen to come to shul and daven in the morning. Because what he's telling you, if you look at the words without reading the whole thing, but it's kindled his wrath. And that's a rather severe expression. You don't just kindle God's wrath by doing something minor. So obviously God is not playing favoritism at all. He's saying, hey, look, even though you come into shul and you daven every morning and you put on talis and tefillin, and you think that you're doing a magnificent job just because you're coming in here and running through the siddur as one runs through a lahavdil, a newspaper. So he's telling you openly, hey, don't think that you're sending me any doisig glicken, because in fact you're doing nothing. You're doing nothing. For me, it's just a big waste of time from beginning to end. So that being the case, what then does it boil down to? These are the people that we're counting on. This is our stronghold. And it boils down to, which has been our thoughts and our philosophy for all the years, certainly for all the years that I'm here, and that is that everyone is on a one-to-one basis with God. There's no such thing as being that I do certain things, or I belong to a certain sect or to a certain group. That means I'm in and I'm taken care of, because in the ultimate it's one-on-one all the way. It's what did you do and who are you personally. And I don't care what motions you go through, what are you sincerely, what are you in your heart. And one of my my favorite thoughts really is what I've said many, many times. And as it says, Rachamana Liba Ba, which means Rachamana means God, Liba means the heart, Ba'i wants or needs. God wants the heart. He wants sincerity and He wants the heart. He wants sincerity and He wants the heart. There's no doubt in my mind. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever. God doesn't care how long your hair is, what color your suit is, or anything of outer appearance. God is not hung up on those things. No way in the world. He's much too real to be hung up on those type of things. That's good for us people to place labels upon people. Once, if you look like this, then you must be like this. And if you don't look like this, then obviously you're no good or you're distant. No such thing. No such thing. There's a heart and a soul inside the person, and that's what counts in the ultimate. That's what counts in the ultimate. You might come to shul on a Shabbos. For people who don't come every morning, for whatever reason they don't come, they don't come every morning, and they come in Shabbos to shul. Or say they pray at home, or they don't pray every day. And Of course, the proper way is for a man to get up and put on talis and tefillin and daven every day, no question about it. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes 5 minutes of sincere prayer is more valid than 5 hours of baloney.
Sincerity of the heart.
100%. 100%. He says it here openly. They're not coming to praise my name, they're coming to do their habits. If you're not coming to praise my name, God says, then what are you doing? You're reading the newspaper to me? Then what are you doing for me?
Somewhere where I read, you're not supposed to pray isolated by heart. And that would go along to what you say, because that would be a habit that you say, you would know it by heart and you would say it so fast
100%.
that the concentration won't be the same if you read, because you probably couldn't read it as fast as if you knew it by heart.
When a person makes a blessing, there are 2 ways to make a bracha. There are 2 ways to make a bracha. You listening, kids? Good. There are 2 ways to make a bracha. You can make one bracha before you have it. Before you fry, you wash, you sit down to eat, you make the motzi. It took you about a half a second to say it. Your bracha is made. I mean, you covered your base, your bracha is made. But on the other hand, you just the same could have recited the Chinese national anthem, and it would have been the same thing also. And in essentially what you're doing is you're saying, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed art thou, O Lord, and you're thanking God for giving me this piece of bread, because the fact is that there are people in different parts of the world, or even right here in New York, probably right here in our very neighborhood, who don't have that piece of bread, and who certainly don't have what we do have. So it's a matter of when a person sits down, certainly to a juicy rib steak, which costs $3 a portion or whatever, certainly a person should make a blessing and really thanking God. Thank God that I have this, that I can afford this, and that I have it. I'm blessed. You know, how many millions, how many tens of millions don't have it? It doesn't mean that one has to be so idealistic that they're starving right now in Bangladesh, and that's why I should walk around crying all day long. But at least when the time does come to thank God, it should be done sincerely. It should be done sincerely. And that's what God cries about. You're just reading the words, and you're not thanking me. You're not saying anything to me. You're getting it out of the way, and that's not what the prayer is all about. Without getting into all the stories about people who didn't even know how to daven, and all they knew was say one line, or the stories of people who never learned, they were never taught how to daven, and all they knew was the aleph beis, and they would come into shul and sit down and just say the aleph beis. They didn't know what they were saying. They just said aleph beis, but with such feeling, such sincerity, their hearts cried. Something like that registers. On the other hand, if you just run through it, it's... So that's the first thing that's saying. This is the legal end of it, that when one makes a bracha, first of all, know what it is that you're about to eat. You don't make a bracha, then walk over to the refrigerator and see what you're going to pull out, because you don't know what you're going to get out of the refrigerator. You have a fruit, know that you're going to make it on the fruit, and you thank God for the fruit. If it's cake, you make a bracha, you thank God for the cake. If it's a glass of scotch, you take a good look at the glass, you make the bracha, you thank God for the scotch, or whatever else. But know what you're thanking God for, and take it from there. You know how many people can't afford a glass of scotch? Okay. 2. Does anybody want to read, or should I read the whole thing? I'll read the easy one, and I'll honor someone with the longer one. When we say a benediction, our mouths must be free of saliva, nor should anything else be in our mouths, for it is said, my mouth shall be filled with thy praise. Which means quite literally that nothing should be in the person's mouth. You don't chew gum and make a bracha at the same time. Or to say if you're eating something and the next food that you're about to eat warrants another bracha. Say you're eating cake, which was Borei Minei Mizonos, or Mizonot, whatever. And you're about to eat a fruit, which is Borei Pri Ha'etz. So you don't still hold the cake in your mouth and make the bracha on the fruit. You first swallow what you have in your mouth before you make the bracha on the fruit, so that every bracha can be a full bracha. Taken from the pasuk, my mouth shall be filled with thy praise. Which is the same thought again, that when you're making the bracha, it should be a complete, sincere bracha with your total concentration on the bracha, which would include the concentration of the mind, as well as having nothing else in one's mouth to be able to concentrate solely on the bracha. Okay, whoever reads the next one, being that it's a very long one, it's for the rest of the page and into the next page, so maybe I'll stop as they go from one topic to the next, so maybe I'll just stop and explain a bit, then we'll go on. Who wanted to read 3?
It is forbidden to utter the name of God in vain, and whoever utters it in vain is guilty of violating the divine command. For it is written, thou shalt fear the Lord thy God. And it is written again, if thou wilt not observe, to fear this glorious and fearful name. Included in the concept of fear is that one should not mention his great name unless it is by the way of praise or blessing whenever required, or when studying the Torah. One's entire body must tremble upon mentioning the name of God, blessed be his name, but one should not mention it in vain, God forbid. This injunction applies not only to the ineffable names, the 4 letters Yod, Pei, Vav, Pei, the Tetragrammaton, but to all attributes of him, blessed be he. It is forbidden to mention the name not only in the holy tongue, Hebrew, but in any language. He who in any language curses himself or his neighbor by pronouncing the ineffable name or one of his attributes. An attribute is a word or phrase by which we praise the Holy One, blessed be he, such as the great, the mighty, the revered, the faithful, the glorious, the strong, the steadfast, the omnipotent, the gracious, the merciful, the zealous, the long-suffering, the abundant in mercy, is liable to the penalty of lashes. Due to our sinful propensities, most people are careless and say in the vernacular, God shall punish him, or the like, thus violating a divine command. If one curses without mentioning the ineffable name of God or one of his attributes, or if the curse can be inferred from the contents of one's words, as for instance when one says, may that man not be blessed by God, or using expressions of similar nature, although one does not incur the punishment of lashes in this instance, nevertheless it constitutes a violation. It is likewise forbidden to incorporate his name, may he be blessed, in a letter, no matter in what language it is written. Many people erroneously write his name, may he be blessed, in the vernacular, or they write the word adieu, which in the French language means with God. This constitutes a clear violation, for in the course of time, the metal will be thrown on a dunghill. The mentioning of God's name frequently, especially when mentioned disdainfully, God forbid, causes poverty in Israel, and wisdom and endeavor are required to abolish this evil. When saliva accumulates in one's mouth, one should spit it out first and then mention the name of God. Likewise, when one is about to kiss the scroll of the law, one should first spit out the saliva. When we wish to mention the name of God in our daily talk, we are to say Hashem, the name, and not as the common people say Adoshem, for this is undignified when referring to heaven.
Very good. There are several points made here. One point that he mentioned, which I'm happy that not too many people are aware of or observe, and that is the law. Likewise, when one is about to kiss the scroll of the law, one should first spit out his saliva. Because if that were to be observed in every shul before they walk around with the Torah, the Yego is going to have some job come Monday morning, and deserving of every penny that he gets. It means you can also swallow your saliva. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Yeah. Before kissing the Torah?
Yes. What happens when you write sometimes God, you write the G-D, in order not to write the full
right.
name.
That's permissible, that's all right. So on top of the letters, which of the points that he made, we'll go in order. We'll come to that because he mentions that here also. God's name should not be mentioned in vain. That's the first thing he says. God's name, it means that God's name should not be mentioned in vain. That, I'm serious. It means that God's name should not be mentioned in vain in any conversation or in any sense. Or if one wants to swear, if two people are talking and you're trying to impress upon the other person that you're telling the truth, so you're saying, I swear by God's name, and you go on to mention his name. Anytime you use God's name, it's not permissible. At any time, you don't mention.
But if you don't use
doesn't swear to be.
If you're repeating, let's say you've been talking, oh God help me, or something like that, is that considered in vain?
No. Well, if you're saying the name in vain, means not within the bracha, not within an organized blessing. As if you're making a blessing, that's part of the blessing. Anything out of the blessing is considered in vain. But there are other expressions. But there are other expressions that one refers to. He basically mentioned on to the 13 attributes. For those who ever saw when we sing on during the holidays on the Untitled, before we take out the Torah, when we sing 3 times, Hashem, Hashem, Karachim, L'chanan, Erechapayim. Those are the 13 attributes of God, which he basically mentioned over here. The great, the faithful, the glorious, the strong, and so on. And even more than that also. But there are expressions that a person can use when they're referring to God in their own personal expressions that in no way incorporates any of God's names, such as Father or Melech, King of the world, King of kings, Father of fathers. I mean, there are many, whatever a person feels, the expressions that you can use. But they're saying as far as using the name, a proper name of God, in vain, is considered a violation, which they say at the time was punishable by lashes. Lashes was makis, it's called, which really means lashes. Where in the olden days, when there was Sanhedrin yet, there would be various sins that if one had committed one of them, they would be trialed, and the verdict might have been lashes, where a person got 39 lashes from the Sanhedrin. And that means literally lashes. They got lashes from the Sanhedrin. Yeah?
For those of us that are not accustomed to speaking Hebrew, when someone asks us about the well-being of someone else, are we always saying thank God?
No.
That is not considered.
No. It's not wrong with saying thank God.
You can use praising him, but not in vain.
You are not wrong in saying thank God, which in Hebrew you say Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem, which means bless God or thank God. It's not wrong in saying that.
What about Nuta?
It's fine. It's fine. Because you're abbreviating 2 words. Beis Hey is not God's name. If you were to just combine the 2 letters, you'll have either Ba or whatever value you choose to put under it. But Beis Hey is 2 words, Baruch Hashem.
I was told that on a piece of paper that, like a letter that you write from something like that.
You shouldn't throw out afterwards.
Right, because they say it doesn't work.
You shouldn't throw it away, it means Baruch Hashem, but in fact, if it would have been God's name, you would not have been permitted to write it to begin with. But it shouldn't be thrown away anyway.
That was mentioned in this paragraph about God's name on paper for the dunghill. You have books, Hebrew books, that are very old, that be buried because you can't destroy them. Which books are so required? Let's say like you have school books all written in Hebrew or something. How do we know? We don't know the book back there. Someplace along there's something written, but we're not sure of.
It's made.
Have to be so
No.
way?
No, if that would be the case, then you would not be permitted to throw away the Jewish newspaper, which is also, or let alone an Israeli newspaper, which is totally written in Hebrew. And the law of not destroying or desecrating is specifically on the name of God, not upon the language. If you write out, if you have a newspaper which is telling you about the events of the world, it's not a religious item. Nowhere are you mentioning God's name in it, and it has no bearing to this law at all. You just take it, you dispose of it as you would dispose of any other newspaper. Anything that, or the same applies to books. If it's a book that's written in Hebrew, that's going to tell you the 10 finest French restaurants in New York, there's nothing holy about it. You can dispose of that book.
An ordinary siddur or matzah?
Or anything, a siddur, a matzah, or a Zmira's book, a little bencher, these books that they give out at the bar mitzvahs, or at the various fairs where they have parts of the davening or parts of benching, though they have it in English also. They're all considered religious books, and they have to be buried. And being that you mentioned that, just to throw in something else, the mezuzahs, if someone takes on a mezuzah, and there's the klaf inside, the parchment inside the mezuzah, that has to be buried also. Or the inside of the tefillin has to be buried also. The whole tefillin really, but definitely the inside of the tefillin has to be buried also. Because these are all at this point, being that whatever was written upon them were religious items, so that automatically makes it a davar kedusha, which means a holy item, and it has to be disposed of properly, which is only by burial. But anything else if it has no religious, no holy value, then it's nothing. It's
You mentioned, I believe, it's Yud-Kei.
right.
What does that mean?
That is the actual name of God. If you look in the Siddur, Aruch Atah, the next word, which is God's name, is spelled Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And that's not to be mentioned or to be written or anything of the kind. Furthermore, God has different names. Yud-Kei, a Yud, and then say even if you have something in it, then a Hey at the end. Yud-Kei, which was Ka, Hallelujah, the last part of the Hallelujah, is also God's name. That should also not be written or destroyed. What some people do is, or Kale, Aleph, and the next one you write a Lamed. There's also another one of God's names. How does one then but say there are names that have those two letters at the end of the name? Say, for instance, Michael, Gavriel, where they all have several letters in the beginning, and nevertheless at the end of the word you'll have an Aleph, and you'll have a Lamed afterwards, which means essentially that the last two letters of the person's name is God's name, right? So what do you do then? You have to write your name. So some people say, being that it's written as a name and you're not really writing it as God's name, but that's what your name happens to be, is permissible. But some people say you just finish your Aleph, and either you make a little dash in between that and your next letter, or take the most popular word, Yisrael, Israel, the land of Israel, Yisrael, or the name Yisrael, is Yud, Sin, Reish, and the last two letters are Aleph, Lamed, which is again God's name. So how do you write that also? Either you make your Aleph, then you put a little dash in there, then you make your lamed, or you do your aleph and a little schmitchik on top, so that you don't have to write out the full word. And nevertheless, whoever knows how to read usually will know that the next letter is supposed to be a lamed, and that's why you couldn't write it out. You made that instead. But it's not permissible to write it out.
Not to write down the lamed?
Right, not to. But some people write it and they say it wasn't. The intention is not for writing God's name, being that's not what my intention is. I can write it. That happens to be my name. That's not what I started out to write, and it should be permissible. Some people say that also, and some people write, again, depending on yeah? What did they say?
Those who read the Jewish press, they have commentaries.
Yeah.
What you have to be aligned on Shabbos. What are you supposed to do with that?
That's an excellent question. It really is. I've had that question for the longest times already. It's an excellent question. What we're asking is that whoever reads the Jewish press, whoever sees it, it's certainly some parts of it are pertaining to the law. Some parts of it are you can even have something on the portion of the week. Or they'll just give you general, or if it's before Hanukkah, say they'll give you laws, which means technically at that point it becomes somewhat of a religious item. Now, nevertheless, they'll be careful never to write out God's name totally. If it's in English, they'll write G-D. If it's in Hebrew, they won't write it out, except for that boo-boo of 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they got hit over the head for that. And so the question is, what do you do with the newspaper? Because technically it's a shayla. I'll ask you another question. If you think that's a question, I'll ask you a question. You take the Shulchan Aruch that you have before you, that's written completely in English, and there are no Hebrew words in it altogether. It's written completely in English. And God's name is not mentioned in it. They're strictly laws. How is that to be treated? Can you dispose of it? Number one. Can one take it into the washroom with them, which you're not allowed to take any holy item into the washroom? A siddur, a chumash, a bench, anything. You're allowed to take it because, again, as we learned before and we'll learn later on, that you're only allowed to make brachas or read anything of holiness when the situation is totally clean and conducive to it. Now, how about the Jewish press? Are you allowed to take a Jewish press into the bathroom and read it? Or any book that's written in English and has no mention of God's name, and there's no Hebrew written in it, are you allowed to take it into the bathroom?
But I would think that the Shulchan Aruch deals with so many matters, many of which are really holy matters, and I would think normally I would not bring that in.
That's
right. I would lean that way as well. I would certainly lean that way, because being that though it is really written in English, but the fact is that it's a law book and it is a holy book. It's written in English. It could be written in another language as well. But the fact is that it is a holy book and it is holy writings, and these are our laws. And it certainly should be treated with respect. If we're going to assume that, then obviously the Jewish press would fall into the same category. Even though half of the newspaper is telling you about openings of all sorts of wig shops and the fact that ZC's underfashions moved again, but nevertheless there are parts in it that are a bit holy, so I guess it would fall into that category. For those who read it, know that every week they're moving, whoever they are. But what are you supposed to do with the paper?
It also says in different articles it will say Hashem.
Yeah.
So actually, it's just as
I'll tell you, I don't know why they themselves, I don't know why the question has never been sent right back to them. And someone should write in, it was?
Yeah, somebody said they.
And what did they answer?
That the information within the newspaper is so important that you should never throw out the newspaper anyway.
That's what they answered.
So they said you should give it to the neighbor.
And what's the neighbor going to do with it?
Give it to another neighbor.
I see.
They had a picture there, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had come in. It was part of a shul, and for somebody who did some rabbi wrote it and mentioned the fact they throw this out. You shouldn't print these things. He said, the class sent the following week had an article saying that he apologized for this. Now, so we cut it out and we put
Either if those who don't want to throw out their Jewish presses, so then it would fall into the category of shemus, which has to be buried. So I guess you would find yourself a shul that is willing to accept the Jewish press from everybody and take them into the shul. Or find out, better yet, find out where Rabbi Klaas davens. Find out where his shul is. Bring it to his shul. He's the publisher, the editor of the Jewish press, or Shalom Klaas. Find out where he davens and ship them all down there. I personally am not that avid a reader of it. I see it from time to time. But I never saw that question. The guy should have written right back and said, "What kind of answer is that? Give it to your neighbor." I'm asking if you can throw it out or not. So you tell me.
They asked it when the name of Hashem was.
That's an exception.
And that's why they said they should have been more careful, and people will throw it out. So they answered, instead of apologizing, they said you
should never throw the paper
out.
out.
Give it to someone else.
Could these papers be buried with the religious person?
What's the person?
Yes.
I mean, you're asking, assuming he hasn't read it yet, or
No.
in general?
No.
In general, you mean, as far
for
as.
example, in my mother's shul, an Orthodox shul, and the rabbi was my father, was a kohen, and he felt that besides, like you just said, real believers, besides not just being a kohen. So the religious books from the shul is very good.
Yeah. You're asking if you can go bury the Jewish press per se, if it takes on that, kind of holiness. Exactly. I don't think it's to the point. Other books of, certainly can. That's where they bury them. Okay. There's a lot of laws pertaining to, I don't want to get into it now, being that you just mentioned burial, that pertain to things that are placed in or along with the person who's being buried, that are mazel bika things, that are things of request. Just to give you one quick, for instance, is that assuming it hasn't rained for X amount of days in an area or in a land where rain is essential, where all over it's essential, but certainly in a place where it's truly essential for nature to function, and it hasn't rained. It says one of the segulas, so one of the things to do, which bring blessing, is when a holy man dies and he's being buried, to either tie a wet towel or a wet handkerchief or something around his wrist, or place a glass of water in the coffin if he's being buried with the coffin. In Israel, they don't bury in coffins, by the way. Only out of Israel. Diaspora is in coffins. In Israel, they're buried right into the ground. Place a glass of water with him, or tie a wet band around him, and that is a bracha, that is a blessing for rain. And interestingly enough, when I studied in Israel a while ago, they had, there was a period of time where they really didn't have rain for a very, very long time. And to them it's so essential, it's everything. The rain season is everything. And this was around December time already, and it hadn't rained yet. And at the time, the great Rabbi Aaron Kotler, for those who heard of Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who came from Europe and went on to was then already the greatest sage of our day. He's passed away about 15 years ago. I'm sure you must have heard of Rabbi Aaron Kotler. He was in Lakewood. And when he was buried, they placed within him a glass of water. And the end of the story, of course, and sure enough, thereafter it rained and poured for days. And of course you can say, well, it would have rained and poured anyway. But the fact is that I'm sure he was the last of, just an interesting point, and we'll go on. Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who was my father's teacher, he was the last of the rabbis, and I don't mean rabbis as I always say, our interpretation of a rabbi. He was the last of the sages, the holy people, and he only died about 15 years ago, that everybody listened to, where he said something that was indeed the law. In other words, say a question would be asked. And even amongst, though he was a Litvak, but even amongst the Hasidim, his word was the final word. If he would say something, all the other Hasidic rabbis bowed to him. That if he were to say something, that's the way it is and that's final. You're from a different sect, it makes no difference. But this is what Rabbi Aaron Kotler said, and this is the way it is. And with his passing, we still have some great rabbis, but no one is in the position where he says, and it goes, there are 500 different people now, and you say this, and I say that, and you disagree with me, and I disagree with you, and it's chaos. But he was the last of the greats. And when he passed away, they buried with him some water, and sure enough, it started raining. But to talk about him, it would take just 5 hours to talk about the kind of person that he was. Just a bit of trivia for those who are interested. He was my sandik. You know what sandik is? He was my sandik. We had just come to America, and I was born, and he had just come to America also. And my father called him up and said, I'm making the bris, and I want you to be the sandik. And which was a big kuvvet to begin with, because he was not into, everyone wanted him for something or other, and if he were to start showing up to every little thing, he'd be spending his days and his years being sandik here, marrying a couple here, doing this here. So his policy was basically to do nothing, but I guess he couldn't turn my father down, so he was my sandik. Which can't hurt. Yeah, little part where I am. I got to know. Just one thought on that, and I'll go on, because I really don't want to go into it. But I wish I was 100th of what people think that I am. I wish I was 100th of all that. They put you up on a pedestal. A person always has to work on themselves, constantly learning, constantly working on themselves. Whatever, yeah. Partially. We'll go on. Page 14, the second paragraph. Great care should be taken not to utter a benediction in vain, God forbid. Nor should one create for oneself an occasion over which to utter an unnecessary benediction. If by inadvertence we do utter a benediction in vain, or we mention the name of God unnecessarily, we should thereafter say, Baruch Shem Kavod Machaso Le'olam Va'ed, or blessed be the name of His glorious kingdom forever and ever. We'll stop it here for a moment, because this is a statement that he's making. If one starts making a bracha, for instance, and you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed be thou our God, Elokeinu melech haolam, and you're into the bracha, and for one reason or another, you are not completing the bracha. You cannot complete the bracha. Either you started making the bracha, say hamotzi, and then you realize there's no bread in the house, which means you cannot make the hamotzi now on something else. Or assuming you're sitting down and you're entertaining and you're eating some fruit, and then 10 minutes later you take another piece of fruit and you forgot that you already have made the bracha 5 minutes ago on the apple, and you're about to start making, and you started making the bracha rather on the orange right now, which is the same bracha, and you said Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, and then you remind yourself that you made the bracha already. So at this point you mentioned God's name. Now, to complete the bracha doesn't make sense because you made the bracha already. You don't make two brachas on the same kind of food. It's the same bracha you made already that covers all the fruits. What do you do then? You started your bracha. You're basically mentioning God's name in vain right now. So they're telling you what you say is Baruch Shem Kavod Machosoli Olam Va'ed, which means blessed be the name of His glorious kingdom forever and ever. Which means once you mentioned God's name already, rather than to just let it hang in the air, so you're saying blessed be His name forever and ever. Being that you mentioned it, you're turning it into some kind of bracha. Exactly. If immediately after pronouncing the name of God in a benediction, we remember that there is no need for the benediction, we must conclude it with the verse, Lamdeinu chukecha, teach me thy statutes. For instance, if you're only in the first part of the bracha now, which means you said Baruch atah Hashem, you did not yet say Elokeinu melech ha'olam. You're at the first part of the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem, and you remind yourself that you're making the bracha in vain right now. You finish that Lamdeinu chukecha, which means teach me thy statutes. Of course, in Tehillim, in fact, there is a bracha which says Baruch atah Hashem Lamdeinu chukecha. So the fact is that you just uttered a bracha from Tehillim, from the Psalms. And it certainly does not fall into the category of a blessing in vain, because the fact is that you carried out the bracha to the end. It's not the bracha that you started to make, that would have been in vain, but you concluded it with another bracha. As this is a complete verse in itself, it is as though he had recited the Psalms, and the name consequently was not mentioned in vain. If we have also begun the word Elokeinu, our God, but after saying Elokei, meaning the God of, and have not uttered the last part of the word Nu, in other words, Elokeinu is the word, you only said Elokei, you didn't finish the whole word, and have not uttered the last part of the word Nu, then we should conclude with this verse, with the verse, Yisrael Abinu me'olam v'ad olam, Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Which means if you said Baruch atah Hashem Elokei, and you didn't finish Nu yet, so you say Israel, our Father, forever and ever. At any rate, we are to add, blessed be the name of His glorious kingdom forever and ever. After you make that whole bracha in vain, so you have to finish off with Baruch Shem Kavod Machosoli Olam Va'ed, which means blessed be the name of His glorious kingdom forever and ever. Anytime that God's name is mentioned in vain in the bracha, it has to be concluded with blessing God, because so that it should not be, in fact, in vain, totally in vain, which if you leave it just hanging in the air, you can't complete it on the bracha that you started making, for whatever reason that you can't continue your bracha, then you're just leaving it up in the air. So you finish it off with Baruch Shem Kavod Machosoli Olam Va'ed, which means blessed be God's name forever and ever. And that more or less covers up the bracha. Just one more thing, which is a continuation of this. If a person utters a benediction over water and then becomes aware that someone in the neighborhood had died, when it is customary to spill out the water stored in the houses of the neighborhood, because drinking such water is considered dangerous, in spite of all this, but if the person made the bracha already, he must nevertheless taste some of the water, so that his benediction shall not be uttered in vain. He need not be concerned about the danger, as the scriptures say, whoso keepeth the commandment shall know no evil. After drinking a little of it, he shall spill out the rest. But regardless, so that the blessing that he made should not be in vain, they're trying to bring out how great a violation it is to mention God's name in vain. So that though the water is supposedly contaminated and should have been poured out right away, but being that you already made the benediction, you just take a sip of the water so the bracha is not for nothing, and then you pour the water out. If a person is in doubt whether he said any of the benedictions, he is not bound to repeat it except grace after meals. If a person is in doubt if they made a bracha, if a person is eating right now, and they just reminded themselves that they don't remember if they made must be, you still must maintain the dignity of the house of worship. For instance, in a shul, you can have a concert, you can have a wedding, a bar mitzvah, even perhaps a meeting, right? Anything. But still, the dignity of it must be maintained. If it's going to be a meeting where there's going to be carrying on and so on and so forth, and again, the shul is not the place for it.
Well, you take an Orthodox shul, a lot of Orthodox shul in the neighborhood, they have an organ during the ceremony, and let's say a female singer. If they are considered Orthodox shul, why would they have that, knowing that it's not correct?
Because they're led towards the conservative.
No, they're doing
Well, that's not fixed.
No, it's not a matter.
one that's just brought in.
Well, that's how they justify it.
No, I mean, let's say the people are not requesting it, the bridal party is not requesting it per se.
Put it this way: if we can get away,
their attention, they can have the use.
put it this way: if we get away with anything, perhaps it would be with music, but certainly not with the second half of it. Because perhaps the music you can work around it.
In other words,
Because it's not a desecrate. You know, you're not doing anything. But the second half of it, you probably wouldn't need justification. Because the chuppah can go on very nicely without it. And I've been to several weddings, and after hearing the soloist sing several times, whatever they sing, the wedding probably would be nice if they didn't sing anyway. So I've heard what they got singing there.
Yeah, but that's not the idea is what you're saying. You really shouldn't have a woman sing. Well, that's the thing I wanted to know.
Yeah, I wonder how, I just brought to my mind that I had a girlfriend who was always, her father was a rabbi, and et cetera, she knew the rules backwards and forwards. She sang at my wedding. She does sing it, she did sing at weddings.
Well, that's what happened. My oldest son, we had a lady.
I don't mean to start a whole thing here on I'm just talking about, the laws here pertain to the sanctity of the shul.
I was so surprised.
We weren't married in the shul, but even so.
Yeah, no, it stands, we're talking here as far as the shul, it stands to reason. The same thing would be that if in a shul, regardless if it's wedding or not, it would turn into a
Sideshow.
right. For instance, to show a movie, right? Just for instance, to show a movie. In a social hall or in any other room, it's perfectly all right. Perfectly all right. There's something wrong with it. But to go into the shul, put a screen up in front of the shul and show a movie, that's wrong.
Well, they said
Or to play bingo, or take it a step further, to play bingo in a shul, it's wrong.
You know what I heard? If you have a door like this, Rabbi, and close the whole entire front. No, I mean, I just want.
If it's in another part of the building, is it the same thing?
No.
As far as what?
Things are like that.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yes, it isn't as long as it
all right.
isn't the Torah is.
Believe it or not, it's all right.
Because I was thinking it's the way they run it.
If there's another location, fine.
Yeah, it is.
But if
It's a separate part of the
yeah, I'm saying if it would be in a different building entirely, fine. But if not, you can remember being in shul. Though a lot of rabbis are opposed to it because they say it's gambling on the premises and so on. But the fact is, the money is
needed.
right. I mean, it's not illegal, and you're not.
It's a good way to raise funds without taxing your own congregation.
You should only know how many yeshivas were built and how many shuls were built for bingo. Believe me, you should only know how many.
That's how our
over the years.
Find us a hall.
But not in
We need one.
shul. No, we had in a regular hall.
I said, find us a hall. We need one.
Yeah, I know. We did for 10 years, and then we first built the shul. We worked for 10 years.
Okay.
All right. Happy with that. Okay.
Okay. 2. Before entering such holy places, we must wipe the mud off our shoes, and we must take care that there be no dirt either on our bodies or on our garments. If need be, it is permissible to spit on the floor there, but it must be immediately rubbed out with the feet.
I don't understand that. I mean, you wouldn't be more appropriate in your handkerchief?
But you're not supposed to be carrying it.
You're not supposed to carry a handkerchief? No, that's going too far. Who said you're not supposed to carry a handkerchief?
You can't, even on Shabbos. You're not supposed to carry
No,
anything.
wait.
Shuls
Is
all
that
have
so?
walls that
I
marriage
didn't
is
realize
given
that.
to
Right. It's supposed to look fun.
Or you can put your handkerchief on the floor.
No, really. I mean, you can carry a handkerchief in your pocket on Shabbos.
That
No.
makes it.
No,
Not
it's
on
not.
Shabbos.
No?
Shabbos not supposed to carry anything.
But we're not talking particularly
We're not talking
about
about
Shabbos. This doesn't
Well,
happen on
They were
Yeah, but-
saying that chances are they had dirt floors years ago, and you spit in the floor,
Well,
it
cement
wouldn't make
floors,
that much
right.
difference, it would be just.
And this means in the outside upon entering, rather than the saying before entering, as the first two words on it.
Well, if you're not
Or-
supposed to carry a handkerchief, then that's
We're
why
not
that's
talking
fitting.
about Shabbos.
Yeah.
But
This
even
is
in
this is just a
Shabbos-
general
Yeah.
a general statement before entering. That's the why you should again to keep the sanctity of the shul.
Well, even if you're there, you should like, you come and say,
What do you think we come in here house church?
of course.
We must not enter
I do, I have
a holy place merely for the purpose of taking shelter from the heat or from the rain. We may enter there to call our friend, but we must first read there some biblical verses, or study some Mishnah, or offer some prayer, or listen to some religious discourse, or at least sit down for a while, for even just sitting in a holy place is considered meritorious. Thereafter, we may call our friend. So they're starting out saying we must not enter the holy place merely for the purpose of taking shelter from the heat or from the rain. Means that if you're coming in strictly to use the house of worship for shelter, it's not the right thing because the purpose of it is not as a shelter, but rather, of course, for holy purposes. However, if one comes in to call a friend, so that it shouldn't be just that you're coming in to call a friend, do something worthwhile as long as you're there. If the davening is going on, listening to the davening for a few minutes, or sit down, but it's saying even just to sit there is worthwhile in the shul. So at least it shouldn't be that you're using the shul for some purpose of your own, but rather you're acknowledging the presence of the shul, and then you go about whatever you have to do. It is forbidden to eat, drink, or sleep in places of worship, even if it is only a short nap.
That'd be a good sermon on Shabbos.
But those who would have the hair would probably be sleeping. But it is permissible to sleep there for the sake of a meritorious act. When one, for instance, wishes to spend the night of Yom Kippur in the synagogue. But one must keep at a distance from the Holy Ark. It is likewise permissible to have in the synagogue a sacramental meal, provided there is no drunkenness and no frivolity connected with it. Those who study in the synagogue regularly are likewise allowed to eat and sleep there even regularly, in order that they may not lose time. There are those people who, there are very few of them around, but their time is spent mostly within the shuls, within the synagogues, where they sit and they learn. When it comes time to daven, they'll get up and daven. When they finish davening, they'll grab a bite, and they'll sit back down and learn, and that's basically their daily routine. So for that type of person, obviously, it is permissible to take a short nap there, because his nap is not in any way misusing the shul, but rather the whole purpose of his nap is so that he can go on and continue in either study or prayer. So in other words, his nap is not really a physical thing. The whole napping, the whole eating, and the whole sleeping is one continuation of his spiritual being. So therefore it's permissible. But not in a situation where one comes in to go to sleep for an hour.
Our cantor did not live in walking distance of the shul, so we got a copy of him, and he came in on Friday before Shabbos and slept over for Saturday.
Not in the shul, one of the other rooms, I think.
Of course, downstairs.
Yeah. This
So
is
that
only in
was-
the shul. This is
yeah.
only in the shul.
In other words, like in that room would be permissible.
100%. It was just a thought that comes to mind as far as people who live and who spend most of their time in shuls, there was one person who looked at her like, how long ago? Not that long ago, really. Who was called the Rocket Shuttle. Goyim means genius. He was called the Rocket Shuttle. That's where he came from and so on. And he had very long hair. Hair on his head was very, very long. And he would never take a haircut. There are pictures of him. You may have seen in some magazines. Very, very long hair. And one of the greatest minds of his time. And what he would do, he was sitting there day and night, literally day and night. And what he would do is tie his hair to a rope from the ceiling, so that when learning, if he were to doze off and his head would drop, it would pull his hair and would wake him up and he would continue learning. So imagine for that type of person, it's permissible to take a nap should he fall down and
Talking about sleeping, your mother's shul is within walking distance of Bethesda Hospital, and they just raised money in the shul to set up one of the floors so that people who come can sleep over the Shabbos. They can walk to the hospital to visit sick members of the family, and the floor wasn't in very good use, so they just raised funds. They had a theater party to raise money to get to fix up the floor so that people who wanted to be there for Shabbos to visit the hospital will have where to sleep. My mother walked at her home. My mother used to put up a lot of people in her house over a period of time. She got to know a lot of people that way. But there, the shul itself is being used to house family members of people in the hospital so they can go to sleep.
We had gotten a phone call here at the shul one day.
Yeah, when we talk about the shul, it's
within
not
walking
the
distance
sanctuary.
of the
Yeah,
hospital.
okay.
If any of our members says we're not within walking distance of the hospital.
in the olden days that would be
I don't envision any shul that I know of where they would have to stay right in the sanctuary to do their eating or to do their napping. If they had to, they would walk out into this room.
But
Unless
the
there's-
like Israel and Coney Island, you had no place.
Unless
You
there's
go to a storefront. You go to a
Don't
storefront.
stay
It's not
there,
allowed.
that's what I'm trying- I just
Yeah,
don't see it, you know. I can see if you're doing it, that you would go to a place where you would be able to walk out of the sanctuary into the back.
unless there's one.
Of course, this goes back a long time.
In Europe years ago, the shuls were always first they were shtilach, and also, as far as what you're saying, the shuls were made to house the transients. That was common practice, where someone would come. It's not like nowadays where a person would come into a town, into a shtetl, and he'd have to have a place where to stay only to move on the next morning. And the shuls, in many cases, had facilities, food, a cot, whatever, and just lie down and take a nap for a few hours and then move on. Which was in today's Ziv, and of course everything is structured differently, but that used to be common practice.
So then then years ago, the rabbis would have their home would be in the shul, part of the building?
Not necessarily the rabbi, not necessarily the rabbis, but whoever it would be made available, whoever needed it, would be certainly made available.
Well, sometimes they make a shul from a store. Now so they wouldn't have any place for a person to eat or anything. It's just for the services.
Next.
When a synagogue is to be erected, it is necessary to consult a learned man as to how and in what manner it is to be built. And there are several reasons. There's several reasons really. First reason being to know which side Mizrach is, which is the east, which is the side that one has to be facing when they're praying. Now, in our particular case, say the setup we have right now is the correct way. Because the way the bima is right now, facing that way, that is the correct way. But that's not really the only reason why it has to be consulted. I guess for various reasons, as far as there are laws as to how the bima itself is supposed to be structured, where you must have the Aron Kodesh elevated from where the place where the cantor davens, at least by a step. In other words, the total bima can not be just one floor where the Aron Kodesh is here and the Chazan davens from here. There must be something indicating that the Aron Kodesh is above everything, and it has to be a step up. And not a step up from the ground, a step up from where the Chazan is davening. Of course, elevated up and above from where the Chazan is davening. So again, the setup that we have right now is okay, but they tell you to consult a learned person so that all these things can be covered. And it has to deal with the distance between where the cantor stands and your own Kodesh, and so on. So for that, we tell you consult a man who knows what he's talking about, and that should cover it. So these are just basically some simple laws pertaining to a shul. And it goes back to the same principle which they've been making all along, and that is that a shul is a house of worship. It's a house of God for all practical purposes. And being that it is such, it has to be treated with proper respect and proper dignity to maintain the holiness.
I'd like to hear some of that, because I know Orthodox shul, of course, we face the yard, but in conservative, we face the people.
The cantor. It's supposed to face the ark. You're not davening to the people, you're davening.
I understand, so would you know of where they got the idea that they can't face the people?
No. I wouldn't know.
No, I thought you knew.
The same place, I suppose, they got the idea that everything else is all right.
Well, I think it's like you said, from the Bima that there are rabbis, and some make their own. So if you'll have the people know, if the rabbi don't inform them, this is not the right thing.
That's what I mentioned, Charles.
Right.
100%.
Isn't it different also with the Sephardic davening? When our original plans for changing the shul, the table was in the opposite direction. We had to move it up and change it. Yeah, when we did, yes.
We moved it up a step.
The table was at the edge. Remember, we had to move it so that we can daven facing the Aron Kodesh rather than facing the congregation.
No, you mean the shulchan where the Torah is read from has
right.
to be higher than where the chazan.
Not only higher, it's a matter of the original.
No, that can be level with the chazan.
No, the original.
The Aron Kodesh has to be a step.
Yeah, but the original diagram we
Okay,
had, they
it's
put
okay.
a railing at the edge of that top
One step
step.
up the floor.
And the shulchan was right up against it because they
then it's
thought
mixed
we would place the Torah on that and face the congregation. And then we had to change the plans and move the shulchan forward.
Well, most of these
I remember when I was looking at the original plans and I said, isn't this
not sit on
wrong?
the same level that it says upstairs.
As strictly
No,
as
they changed it. There was a railing there and they had to take it
I
away.
remember
in the old days, they
but I
had the
don't think
room,
it had
and
to do with
the
the
shuls then
Yeah,
were
because they had the
much
shulchan up
more
against it. That we would be
elaborate than
facing
the shuls today. Going back to the olden shuls, they all had balconies. They were all gorgeous edifices. I mean, magnificent.
Well, I thought that maybe for one reason too, they put
Sure, they daven in the center. Davening in the center.
You got a point there.
And they built a Aron shul. Yeah, but they daven from the center, and the Torah is read from
Up front?
up front.
No, we daven at the Torah Moshe and Baruch. They lane the Torah from the center.
You can lane the Torah from the center?
Yeah, they lane the Torah from the center.
But you have to face the Aron.
Facing the Aron Kodesh, right.
Yeah.
But it was in the center. There was people sitting in front
You
of
always
Yes.
face the Aron Kodesh. There's no reason to...
There is some shuls have in the center.
The Aron Kodesh was up on a platform, almost like a stage, higher up than the people. And then the people in front of it were sitting facing each other.
Right.
Then there was a center,
I
big square,
see, right.
also a
Yeah.
platform.
I see that.
By us, in our case, it
The
was
women were
practical
upstairs.
to put the
With the
dimmer
booze,
in the middle. We use
use the whole space, but ours is 100%
We don't
already.
have the space.
This is really the last, that's the end of this stress. We're going to something else. Just to answer you where they got it from is, it all started out with the thoughts that occurred in the minds of the rabbis or founders of the other philosophies, conservative, reform, and so on. And the people aren't satisfied with what the so-called old-fashioned way has to offer. So they figured, well, we'll modify everything. And by modifying, it would perhaps make the people more comfortable, or in turn attract more people, or make it more theatrical, perhaps, and taking away from the authentic shul look. And slowly everything started following that trend, where first, of course, the seating became mixed seating. So whereas it can become a family venture rather than individuals. And of course, the introduction of abbreviated sitters caused davening was too long, and they felt that some parts of the davening were not necessary, so that was omitted. And then the next group came along and went a step further, and they introduced, say, the organ into the shul. And they figured, well, what's prettier than walking in Shabbos morning in shul and having a cantor and a choir accompanied by an organ?
How about the English?
English is perfectly all right. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
Well, I think that was really the main thing that was important for the people who did, was the English, rather all the other wasn't necessary at all.
They obviously thought it was necessary.
Well, of course, I understand that.
They thought it was necessary.
Isn't it a matter of speaking directly to the people, like looking them in the face,
Well, the rabbi
rather
does.
than their backs to the
Yes,
people?
so that was the reason, especially like when the bar mitzvah, they wanted the bar mitzvah child to face rather than see his back. Right.
Perhaps. And so on, the modifications came about, and everything thereafter followed, which
Wouldn't you think, though, that most of the changes came right after the Jew was let out of the ghetto, where he wasn't confined to be just with his own? I think the mix of having Jews intermingling in a Christian society, where they became influenced and wanted to become Americanized, that they were able to adapt to the American way, and they suddenly had their eyes open. When they were in the ghetto in Europe, they had no alternative. They all were one way. They were locked in at night, and they stayed there, and they did all the things that was incumbent upon a Jew, an Orthodox Jew. And once they came to America, and they had an option, they opted to reduce all the stress and strain.
No,
of
the main
traditional
reason
Judaism.
was the ones who didn't learn. So they wanted to be modernized because they didn't learn from the beginning when they were children, so they didn't know anything about it. Said, well, look, we want to see, we want to hear English. See, if they were used to it, they wouldn't mind having it that way.
Well, those who were used to it in the old country remained that way. The ones who came to America didn't send their children to
Like
English
my
school.
mother went into conservative school. She says, "What is this? What are they doing?" You know, to her it was like it was goyish. It wasn't even.
also
Right.
take into consideration what was before the ghettos came about.
And my
It was
mother speaks
before
perfectly good English and everything.
the
Still, it's
1930s.
Used to be up and about it.
where they were all put into the
about
ghetto.
it.
What was Judaism before
When
that?
I was a kid.
In the 20s, early
Only Rosh
1900s.
Hashanah.
Well,
We
in
used to go in
America,
for an hour to
when
sit with
the
grandma.
immigrants came, we had waves and waves of immigrants.
Either here or in Europe, what the Judaism looked like then.
But it
As a
started
conservative-
changing in Germany.
A movement started about 60 years ago. The initial reform movement started then yet, which was a Haskalah movement started by a person named Mendelssohn. Have you ever heard of his name? French trip pops up here and there. And it went unsuccessful because the people didn't think there was a true need for that type of modernizing, to that extent anyway. And when the Jews then came to America, the immigrants after the war, in the latter part of the 1940s, then it started coming about, all the conservative movement anyway, started coming about. And as time went on, and the Jews themselves started modernizing their own lifestyles, and automatically it reflected in their house of worships as well, as Jews started moving out to the islands and out of the basic, we refer to them as the ghettos, the Jewish ghettos, which would be Crown Heights, Brownsville. There was no borough back then, East Side. Williamsburg was then in existence as well. Basically, the East Side extended all the way across, and the Bronx, the Concourse, that whole stretch over there. And that is way before. Borough Park was Borough Park. That's way before Flatbush was Flatbush. And Borough Park is only Borough Park for what, some 15, 18 years, that's all. The Borough Park that we know today, the heavy Orthodox scene, is only about 18 years old. Tops 20. And in the past 10 years, it's picked up.
More than that.
Not this
I lived
type
there all
of
my
No,
life.
he's right. They went
Not
from Brunswick
this
to there.
type of
About
concentration.
Oh, no,
20
not
about
deeply
20 years ago, they
concentrated.
started moving
Oh, there
away
were
from
Jews living there, but it
Yeah.
was
Brunswick, they went
never to the point.
We had our
of-
little steeples there.
Yes, but not with this type of strength that
No,
that's
no.
right now. Where,
Not strong enough to close all the stores on
Right,
13th
that's
Avenue, the way
like-
they are now.
And in turn, the kids of these people, and some of the people themselves, moved out into different places, different corners on the map. And as they modernized in their own lifestyles, so too the shul came about, and it had to accommodate the people's thoughts and the people's ideas. And that's where
the rabbis went along with them.
they initiated it. They initiated it.
Yeah, well, that's good.
People wouldn't rise up and say, we want to do this, or we want to do that. If the rabbi was going to say, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's against the law, it's the end of the conversation. You hire yourself, you don't like this rabbi, say, hire another rabbi. He's also going to tell you it's against the law. So you hire another rabbi, he'll also tell you it's against the law, it's the end of it. You can't do it, period.
Well, I think what some of them realize, though, if they don't go a little towards the conservative, they're not going to have anything.
Right, not they won't have anything, they won't have jobs, that's what they don't have.
Well, that's what I meant. They wouldn't have a congregation.
Right. They have to go out and work for a living, and they figure that maybe not healthy.
Well, isn't the question healthy? I mean, so it's the idea is, in your opinion, if you're not going to have them to come in at all, is it better? This is, I think, what they had to consider.
No, it's not that simple a question, but
Well, from what a lot of people tell me, that it's
If
either
I-
conservative or not go.
it's not true.
No.
It's
I mean,
just
because-
not true. If a shul, the trouble was, or is, that rather than the rabbis getting down to some hard, concentrated work, it's easier to cop out and go along with the congregation, thereby making life a lot easier, rather than standing up and saying that this can't be and this can't be and it's against the law and that's it. And if in fact that's what you want, it's not a congregation that you have, it's a glorified social club.
Well,
Now,
we
the
had
job then would have been for every rabbi to sit down and to teach and to educate his people into what the proper way is, and to make it as appealing, or as perhaps I'll use the word appealing, as possible for them to realize that you don't have to go the other way to catch on to what it's really all about. In other words, you can go the right way or the authentic way and explain it properly and make it attractive enough or interesting enough without having to cop out.
All right,
which
so
is
what
the
do
other
you
way
do
around.
with the half a dozen who just don't go along with that, who want to sit with their family? What do you do with them?
It's only
Just forget about them?
no, God forbid. It's only because it's been sanctioned already by the rabbis that it's such a great problem right now.
All right, well, here.
But in other words, what do we do right now today?
Right.
In other words, nowadays.
That's right here. Happened right here. So what happens to these half a dozen people? So there has to be someplace else, otherwise they wouldn't be going.
I think I hear a different question right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Yes, so that's why.
I think I'm hearing a different question right now. There's what happens to people who don't want to go to Orthodox schools, in other words, you're asking.
That's right.
What do you mean what
Because of
happens to
sitting
them?
with their family. So if there
Then I
isn't
guess-
another shul, wait a minute, no, wait.
No,
if
but
there
if
is-
there was no other
That's
place to
what I'm
begin with,
asking.
She's
they
saying
never
she's
knew of any
talking
other
a
place.
She's talking a
Yes,
step
they
further
would
down
have
the
to-
road.
Right.
Or assuming they were used to another place. So you're asking where should they go to right now?
No, yeah, they used to, or let's say if there was only going to be Orthodox, and these people want conservative,
They would have, if it's only Orthodox,
so they would
it's their choice.
start their own.
Where they can get a rabbi from?
Well, that's it.
Who's going to be the rabbi? Who's going to be the cantor? Who's going to be that minion?
All right, so then all right, we'll go your way. If all the rabbis do exactly what it says in the book, and they're not going to be conservative, right? So then you will get quite a few, right now, quite a few thousand people who just wouldn't go at all.
Not the rabbis are doing their jobs properly.
In other words, it's up to them to really convince them.
Of course it is. Of course. Why else are you in this if not to do what you're supposed to be doing?
Well, somewhere
Why
along the way
else?
then we did something wrong and we lost some people.
Yeah, we did a lot wrong. That's the old story. That's the old tragedy. We did more than a little wrong. A lot has been wrong. I think I said, I was here or wherever it was a few weeks ago, that if Judaism would be a company, we would be in bankruptcy right now. There's no question about it. I just heard recently statistics of what percentage of people are Orthodox, or even if not necessarily practicing Orthodoxy, but they maintain the flavor, of Orthodoxy. And I have it home in the house. I think I saw it last Shabbos. I have it in the house. It's in the Good and Monthly Bulletin. A shockingly low figure. Shockingly low figure. That even think along the older way.
How does that compare with the other religions as far as the scope? Meaning, other religions must have orthodoxy.
No.
They must have. I say no.
They're
Going
going
down.
down.
Other religions where you're
They're
orthodox.
modified also.
They're
I'm not
modified.
talking about that.
But
All I
even the
want to
nuns
know
look
is
how they dress.
how do we compare as Jews?
They are hurting
In
very
our,
badly.
in our scope, in our span, are we as far away from the orthodoxy as comparable with other religions? I don't know.
The greatest problem that the church has had over the past, 15 or 20 years, is basically a changing world where the people have new ideas, and new concepts, and new guidelines that does not meet the approval of the Pope and the hierarchy, let us say, of the Vatican. And the Church has lost, they're much more than the Jews, but in the millions. where, say, the average Jew is not aware of it because you know what's going on in the church down the block. Which one?
Of course not.
But if you follow, well, not from seeing in the building,
No, I mean if you hear.
but if you follow, the things are always written about it and so on, and they're hurting terribly. The Pope who passed away, not the one who lived for 30 days, the one before that, what was his name, Paul? The other one, the skinny one.
Whatever his name was.
Right, whatever. So by the time he had left, he started modernizing with it. Of course, the pressure had gotten so strong where they were told that if they don't start adapting to the modern times, they're going to lose a lot, which they've been losing already. And certain laws the Vatican won't budge on. Abortion, they won't touch it. They changed the meat on Friday.
That's right.
We now eat meat on Friday. He did it. That Pope did it.
And the way they dress.
Female priests is another hot and heavy issue right now. Again, the average person who walks down the street, especially a Jewish person, isn't aware of it. They want to ordain their females as well.
Oh, the nuns are coming out of their habits?
Yes.
They're going into modern dress, you don't
Yeah,
know
well,
a nun
that's
anymore?
And all these things are major problems within their groups themselves. They have the one, what was his name?
And there's a question of celibacy.
The fever, what was his name? The priest who came out about a year and a half ago who wanted to conduct the Mass in, he didn't want to use Latin anymore. He wanted to conduct it only in, I think it was Father Lefebvre, somewhere in France or something like that. He wanted to do away with their whole business, and he said he's going to get up and do his own Mass.
In English.
And the Pope, with so many words, he told him with it. He told him no. That's the person Pope. He did it, and the first time he did it, it was covered on the news. He had the biggest turnout that was ever seen. And so they're hurting badly, in their own. And the biggest proof of it is that if all your few major organized religions would be successful for doing things right, there would be no room for so many other small cults to have hundreds and thousands, and if you add them all up, I'm sure millions of followers, because each one of them has some origin. Either they're Jewish, they belong in the shuls. If they're Catholic, they belong in the churches. Wherever their roots are, that's where they belong. And if all these cults are so successful, the Munis and your Hare Krishnas and your this and your temples and these are all people who are drawing off other roots. So obviously, all these places are doing something wrong.
So now even the Reform movement wants to go out. I read an article and seek unchurched, they call the people that they want to attract. The unchurched. In other words, somebody that walks around that doesn't believe in anything particular.
What they're saying there.
And bring them into Judaism.
Their exact.
So what makes that better than the Moonies or
Their exact statement was what they want to do. What they want to do is to go ahead. They're telling the people that if you know someone who is unaffiliated, try to bring him into the Jewish fold, which is evangelical work, basically, and that has never been the philosophy of the Jewish people.
That's right.
Only if there's a situation where it really warrants, say if a person is going to get married and the mate, say, is not Jewish, fine. Then for the sake, if something can be worked out for the sake of a family and whatever may be at stake, so perhaps you talk to the individual, see if there's an interest. If there's an interest, if there's something at stake with it. Just take someone off the street and say, where do you belong? Nowhere, come into my shul. And that's ridiculous, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. But it's open season. I mean, everything goes right now. Nothing is, it's like the expression, nothing is sacred anymore. Everything really goes.
But people are so disillusioned. They feel all the corruption in high places. They see all the wars that have been plaguing us, and they see everything, and they feel, well, if there was a God, we allow these things to happen. A lot of people, you can say it's a cop-out, you can say it's an excuse.
Oh,
but
you brought
why?
up the reason. That's what a lot of people
No,
feel.
but the
Why
point-
did God, that the main thing they bring up is the 6 million.
They would study and
It's
They can't seem to comprehend.
everything else that goes on in this world they understand except for that one.
Well, because they feel it was so horrible. Yeah, well, it burns out children, all these fires.
I mean, there's lots of unanswered questions.
So I said, well, if we knew everything, we wouldn't be here. We'd
Let me
be upstairs.
let me tell you something. Life wasn't made to make sense. Life wasn't created to make sense.
You
It's
wouldn't
not
tell
supposed
that
to
to
make
one of
sense.
these children, would you?
One of my
Life-
children?
Yeah, life wasn't made to make sense. It doesn't.
We learned the hard way. The life wasn't really made to make any sense.
Yeah, but to a child to say that.
Well, I wouldn't tell it to my 3-year-old.
Yeah, well,
daughter.
I understand, but I mean, when even they get, like, they're 8 years old, you wouldn't tell
8 years old also not.
to a child. Well, today, the questions they ask at 8 is like when they, years ago at 16.
Listen, everything according to the person's understanding, but there comes a point as people grow up, we were all young at one time, and everything was a puzzle until you grow older in life and you begin to realize that the only answer to your puzzle is the fact is that I don't understand the puzzle, and that's the answer. There is no answer. There is no answer. There is no answer. It's not a matter of it's not for us to figure out the ways of God or the ways of life or the ways of the world. There are no answers. There just are no answers. Things happen daily.
Yeah, but the new codes, that's what they tell them. If you're going to do
codes.
it,
The Matse Wunderlich,
that
they don't know what they're
everything is
talking
going to
about.
be fine.
Remember when you talk about the easing of the laws?
Yeah, that's right.
Twice, I think I spoke to you about this one, but twice already I've read articles coming from the school on the decision of the Vadha Rabbanim of Flatbush to set up the area for Flatbush and Tennessee. I don't think it's necessary, and I can't see the reasoning for it. Why an Orthodox, the Orthodox Shul should want to ease it that way.
I personally have no comment on it. I have no comment on it. Thoughts. But we have to see what develops, because it seems there are some forces behind everything. I just didn't have the time to get into and see who's pushing for it, who's pushing
That's
for
it.
what.
I was wondering why they should be pushing for it in a city area.
Well, I don't really know the details about it yet. There's an act that was supposed to be a meeting, which I'm sure came over, which I didn't go to, which was supposed to be thrown out to the floor and everyone to voice their opinions. But I didn't get any feedback yet, so I don't really know what took place. But personally, my own personal feelings, I wouldn't say it. First, it'll be a while before it really comes into being anyway, if it does come into being. And I don't know what kind of major approval they're going to get on it.
I was just wondering how much influence Rabbi Cohen becoming president of the Vadha Rabbanim had on that, since he's coming from the small town environment.
No. It's, I don't think it's to his personal benefit that the area goes up or not.
I don't know. They're hurting David.
I know they're hurting. It's why people at East School can't get into a car and drive down.
How would the Arab help them?
In one way, as far as allowing women to be wheeling their baby carriages to synagogue and Shabbos.
I don't know if the whole
children-
thing. I don't know if the whole thing even makes
that
sense.
they're not stuck at home.
There are a lot of babysitters.
Yeah.
I don't know if the whole thing makes sense.
Congregation, they can come to shul with them. They have to be able to
I don't know. As far as that, we'll see what develops in the weeks to come, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so again, just one more finishing thought on what we were talking about, which is really nothing new. It's an ongoing conversation at all times. Nothing new is really come up with. It's just a matter of reiterating several points, and that is that there has been the main success, this is a fact, the main success of all these various cults that are around, Jews for Jesus, Moonies, all these groups, you can put them all into the same drawer. They prey on the loveless child, the abandoned child. When I say child, I don't mean necessarily youngster, but teenager, what have you. People without homes, people without other people who care for them, and so on. Their main come on is come into us and we'll love you, we'll feed you, we'll clothe you, and so on and so forth. And that is something that you can't turn down. Well, yeah, and thereafter go out into the street and start soliciting with whatever it is that we're selling.
After you get to life.
But this is a very, very strong selling point. This is a very strong feature. In other words, you have nothing right now. Your parents don't give a hoot about you.
We love you.
You have no friends. Right.
That's right. It's saying we love you, and then when they start making money for them, they feel needed.
This same girl
That
that I
they
told
need
you
us.
about has 3 grown children. In fact, her oldest daughter is, I think, a year younger than my daughter. And brilliant. This girl has a brilliant mind. As I said, strictly Orthodox, but the girl got it into her she wants to become a rabbi. And of course, it was about the royal. And my friend said, nothing doing in that, don't take your education in that area. And lo and behold, the Scientology thing came along. This is in California, in Bell Park, and her brother, and my girlfriend literally lost 2 children. They came with a truck one day, moved out
Well, you know,
furniture while she wasn't home, took everything that they could.
I just heard Sunday morning them talking about that. If your child decides that they want to, or they think, what the thing to do is not disown them and not tell them you're not going to go along with them. That pushes them out.
All the rules and what you can do, what you can't do.
Well, actually, the parent, without realizing, actually pushed the child out. She should have let her have the education. That doesn't mean that she's going to become a...
Blaming the parents.
No, you know, I'll tell you this. If you tell the child that you don't go along in such a way when they have their own mind, they're going to do just the opposite.
You're up against the most professional forces, the most professional and sophisticated experts that...
Absolutely right.
If you can take 900 people and tell them to drink some Kool-Aid,
worse than that, kill their own children.
You don't need a stronger, any kind of stronger expression of total control over a person's mind. Tell them to kill themselves. You have to be able to take pretty strong control. I mean, I might listen to someone. If you tell me to kill myself, forget it. To go ahead and kill yourself.
They even knew that it was fake.
They knew what they know.
They had drills on it in the past. That is the strongest testimony possible for being able to take over one's mind. So to tell them to move out of their parents' house is a joke by comparison. They talk it into you that your parents are your enemies.
If you look at it that way, then you've got to say that the cults are giving them something, giving them something so strong that they're willing to commit suicide.
A purpose in life. They're giving them a purpose in life. They are giving them a purpose in life. Purpose in life. They come with large funds. I had, I don't know if you know the large funds.
Yes, I heard about the large funds.
They come with large funds. They're well equipped. They come and they seek out who they want and what they want, and they make you offers that that are very, very difficult to refuse. They're organized, they're concentrated, they have professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists. They know how to pick the human mind, especially if you're starting out with a handicap to begin with. And just one quick thing, which I won't go into detail. There was a Mooney group down the block here. They've since closed up and sold the building, and the building is gone already.
Yeah.
Oh, right, that's the building that is.
It's not there
I'm
anymore.
supposed to show you.
You walk there every time.
And I know where I'm walking. And about 2 years ago, they were sending some people around. They had a girl coming in at night, the whole stuff.
They had Shabbos so many
Yeah, she came on Shabbos. Then they called up with an appointment, the whole story.
She came with a birthday present for you.
The birthday present, remember? And I couldn't figure out what it was. Some days Untitled in my mind. I don't even know these people. Birthday presents, and she made an appointment to meet with their Brooklyn regional director, a doctor. I don't remember the name, but as Jewish as Goldberg, and a real. We came in and we spoke and this and that, and I don't know for what purpose. I'm inviting them to come to shul here. I'm telling this doctor, whatever his name is, why don't you come to shul Shabbos morning? And I don't know what's brewing in his mind. One day Phyllis gives me a message that a phone call came in from some guy with the Chinese hat.
From the Reverend Moon's office.
Right, which I won't go into the rest of the story, but the point is they're professionals. They come with large bankrolls. They seek out what they want. And most of the time they're successful. So what they offer is very, very difficult to turn down. And in turn, they move on to the next. They move on to the next. And this is concentrated in 50 states and in many countries all over the world. And their attendance is in the millions, literally in the millions. And that's where their success is. Our failure is their success. That we were strong, they would be knocking a 5 o'clock event. They couldn't talk to me, they couldn't talk to you. Who we have failed with, they fall prey to them. That is the whole thing in our show. Where we failed, they took
Well, it
over.
seems like that in this neighborhood,
They wouldn't have moved out, yeah. Well, they realized what they're surrounded with here. It's like 10 shuls in the neighborhood. Everyone was onto their game already. And, okay. I wanted to tell you, there's some interesting points there as well.
No, it's interesting.